Most anglers are fishing the same spots with the same lures in the same ways. But what if I told you just a few small tweaks could unlock fish others never even reach? Stick around because by the end of this video, you'll know how to turn a crowded lake into your own private honey hole. So this is my top 10 list of ways you can fish differently from most other anglers to catch more fish. So what got me thinking about this concept was the book and the movie called Moneyball. And if you follow baseball at all, basically the Oakland A's, a team with a small budget, everyone was paying players a lot of money if they hit home runs or had a high batting average. Nobody was paying for walks, so they kind of used what's termed a market inefficiency, something that's undervalued, and were able to use that to win a bunch of baseball games at a low budget. Hey, when we're fishing, it's kind of the same deal. Lakes are crowded everywhere we go. Everybody's using a lot of the same lures, fishing a lot of the same places. So if you can figure out places that other people aren't fishing, fish in ways they aren't, figure out lures other people aren't using, well, then the fish are probably going to bite a whole lot better, aren't they? Yeah. So that's the concept, Moneyball in bass fishing. So here's my top 10. So let's start with number 10. And this is the one that everybody wants to do. It's the easiest one, and that's just fish a different lure than everyone else. And years ago, without the internet and not live tournaments and stuff, there were secret baits out there. People didn't know about them. Well, like I said, with YouTube and the internet and social media and live coverage tournaments, most all the lures are out there. Sometimes you can find a lure that in your area most people aren't using. You can find a color variation that's maybe different, like the Bassmaster Classic. Lee Livesey was using a pink bait. A number of pros were using it, but not the general public. So pink was kind of a deal. That's, of course, now that's going to be over in about 2 weeks. Sometimes a bigger lure, going glide baits, those would work. Ned rigs got real popular and drop shots, tiny little baits. Stuff that falls way faster, stuff that falls slower. So you can kind of differentiate. But lures, yeah, if you can figure out something that not many other people are throwing or no one else is, the bass haven't seen, when something first comes out, sure, that works. But good luck trying to find that and keep it a secret for very long. So moving up to number 9, this is the other obvious one that everybody tries to do. Get away from the crowd. Go where no one else is fishing. And sometimes guys like Keith Poche, they can take their boat and they can push back into areas over beaver dams and stuff like that, get to places where in backwaters other people aren't fishing. It used to be years ago when we had smaller boats. If a tournament was taken off from the dam, if you were willing to go 70, 80 miles away, way far away, sometimes you get away from the crowds. The lakes are just more crowded. Even if you do it in a tournament, you can run 70 miles away from all the other tournament crowd. Guess what? The people that live 70 miles away, that live up on that north end, if it's a Saturday, they're fishing up there. So it's hard to get away from the crowds. A couple ways that you can get away from fishing pressure, though, if an area doesn't have many ramps in the area. Some lakes have ramps in all sections. Everything's like 5 miles away from a ramp or 2 miles away from it. Other places, most of the ramps will be down by the dam on one side of the lake. One side's national forest and all parks. The other side's all developed and homeowners, and there's no ramps over here. Sometimes you can. So if you go to areas where there aren't ramps, it's going to be a long run for people. Most people don't want to run way down the lake, so you can get away from crowds that way sometimes. And the other thing is something that keeps a lot of boats out are no wake zones. A lot of urban lakes are ones that are protected for waterfowl or something. If it's a big long cove and you have to idle all the way back, if it's tournament fishermen, they don't want to waste all the time to do it. Even if you're fun fishing, do you want to spend 20 minutes idling back to the back of a long cove and then figure out the fish aren't there and then have to idle back out? The other times too, like on Lake Fork, we have a lot of stumps. If you have to idle way back there into the backs of creeks through all the timber or really shallow areas on, say, like the Mississippi River, it's hard to get into it. That's going to cut down the crowd. So go into the back of some of those creeks. If you can run in, people are going to come in and out. But when it's a little more protected like that, sometimes you can get away from the crowd. Now, number 8 kind of goes back to number 10, and it's about lures, but it's fish a lure that other people just don't want to fish in the area. What do I mean by that? Something that's a lot more work and the casual fisherman doesn't want to fish. For instance, punching, taking a 1 ounce to 2 ounce weight and having to go through those big mats all day. In Florida where everybody does it, it's one thing. A lot of people are doing it. On most lakes, not many people do it. The weekenders, the casual fishermen, not going to do it. And even me, as I get a little bit older, taking that 2 ounce weight and doing that all day, man, unless they're really biting it, I don't want to mess with it most days. always have a punch rod even rigged up. So that's something that other people aren't willing to do. Another thing are treble hook baits, especially like crankbaits. Most people don't like to fish those in wood, and they don't like to fish them in grass. They're going to snag in the wood. They're always going to get grass hanging on them. So if you have a bunch of flooded buckbrush or something, you're going to see a lot of people throwing a spinnerbait down there. You're going to see a lot of people flipping it. How many people are throwing a crankbait through that, trying to get through that? Same with standing timber. Not many is the answer there. Same with grass. You get hydrilla and milfoil, spinnerbaits, chatterbaits, worms, swimming a worm, all that stuff comes through grass great. You take a crankbait and you're winding that thing down, it gets in the grass, it bogs and it ruins the cast and you have to snap it free. It's a lot of work. So being willing to fish a lure that other people don't want to, a lot of times you're giving a fish a totally different look than what he's seeing every day. So for number 7, this has to do with angler perception and go against what's perceived as the preferred location for the season. So what do I mean by that? For instance, say in the wintertime or the heat of the summer, most people are going to be fishing the main lake. That's a good time to go check the very backs of creeks and the super shallow water. In the winter, it's going to be the coldest water. And in the summer, that water is going to be really hot back there. Not a lot of people back there fishing it, so you're kind of fishing the wrong area, but bass live shallow all the time. Conversely, in the springtime, where does everybody go? You guessed it, right? Everybody's in the backs of the creeks. Well, guess what? Some fish spawn on the main lake, they live on the main lake, they never get back to the backs of the creeks. So if you go fish the main lake, or you can fish points, post-spawn, pre-spawn, pull a Carolina rig out in 10 feet of water for those deeper spawners, for the ones that are staging in that clear water, you'll have that all to yourself. Again, whatever the perception is the right area and where most people are going, that's a good way to avoid the crowd by going and chasing those fish. Even if there's less, go chase them in an area where there's less people at. So number 6 is a location deal along the same lines, and it's basically whatever worked in the last big tournament on that lake at that time of year, do the opposite. Now, for instance, Eufaula, a great big lake that Bass and MLF, all the tours always go to in Alabama. That lake, I saw this firsthand a couple times. And now with the live coverage and just all the tournament reports and stuff, everybody knows what the leaders were doing. So one of the times we went down there before, MLF had been there, and then also Bass as well, and an Open, those tournaments were dominated offshore on brush piles. So guess what all of our guys did when we went down there? You guessed it, they were all fishing brush piles. Well, a few of us went up the river and fished shallow grass and stuff. It got one up there on a swim jig. A lot of guys were flipping grass, frogging, all that stuff. Day 1, there was nobody up there. Day 2, a few more people came up by the weekend, but you just got away from what the crowd was. Well, we go back there again in a couple years. Now this time, it got one up the river. So guess where everybody was at during practice? Well, they were all up the river, and people were pounding it. The brush piles, people still knew about it, and a lot of people were doing that. Well, this year, it was a little bit warmer than normal, and what I and a number of the guys figured out by the last day was these fish live on ledges too. Everybody's doing the brush pile thing, everybody's doing the river thing. The fish out in the ledges don't get any pressure, and guess what? Those fish out there were super willing to bite, and the people that fished that did really well at the tournament and blew it out. But even on your local ones, if you pay attention to local tournament reports and somebody goes out and just dominates, and they were fishing a jerkbait in the trees, or they were flipping docks, or whatever it was, well, it's going to get pounded the next weekend. Everybody's going to hear about it, so go do something different than that. You just write that pattern off, because that's probably the worst pattern the week after somebody wins doing it. So number 5 is something that's kind of come into play recently, and you don't have to like it or dislike it or really have an opinion, but scoping, live scope, has really changed the fishing game. For me, I love to shallow fish. I like to do the scoping thing too, but when I prefer to fish shallow. And now that scoping has been so popular, again, tournament wins, everybody's seeing the big bags on it. It used to be in the springtime, like right now, when the banks were flooded and all the buckbrush was in the water and stuff, you had to take a number to go flip this stuff. Since live scope got really popular the last couple of years, guess what? On most of these lakes, in the middle of the spring, people are offshore out scoping around, especially in the early part of spring. And you can go up and have all these flooded willows and buckbrush and stuff to yourself. So if you're on a lake where everybody's scoping, then the banks are more wide open. They're not getting pressure. Now, if you're on kind of a more old school lake where nobody's scoping, if you want to scope, if you're good at it, well, guess what? It's a bonanza because you have the whole middle of the lake, 80% of the lake, all to yourself. And here's the other thing. If you like to scope, but you're on a lake where everybody does it, well, the easiest fish to catch on scope are out in the middle. The suspended ones, the floaters, the jig head minnow. Well, as we've seen with recently with people bed fishing with it, fishing shallow brush piles, targeting cruisers and stuff, you can fish it shallow as well. So basically with scope, whether you use it or not, whether you like it or not, be aware of how many people are using it, how they're using it, and try to fish some way that's a little bit different than the crowd, and I think you'd do a lot better. So moving up to number 4, it's another location pattern, and it's basically stay away from the biggest coves on the lake. Short pockets, which I consider, depending on the lake, maybe one that's 100 foot long to a couple hundred yards long, and then main lake banks are a couple places that don't get near the attention. Short coves have always been a great go-to for pros. Nobody runs 20 miles up the lake and says, oh, this 100-foot long pocket, I'm going to drive 20 miles to go fish that. Now they do go fish some of the juiciest coves. They look on the map and the 10 biggest ones or the 5 biggest ones. People, that's a destination. They run halfway up the lake to get to them. They'll launch up there, spend it. I'm going to go fish this cove today or this cove this afternoon. Short pockets, they don't do it. So they don't get near the pressure. And then the other thing is with short pockets, once you figure out what's going on in one short pocket, you can fish the front to the back pretty quick. You fish the main lake point at the front, you fish a couple boat docks, maybe a lay down tree, maybe a little bit of grass in the back, and all of a sudden you're like, I went to the back of this one, I caught 2 fish on a frog. That was kind of neat. And then you go 200 yards down to the next short pocket, and then you catch another one in the back on a frog in the lily pads, and it's like, wow, this is kind of a deal. And then you can look and you start running all these short pockets in the area. So it's a quick way to dissect a lake, and it's a good way to get away from the crowd. And the other thing that is underutilized are main lake banks, especially in the spring. The coves are where all the action is, but even in the summer, in the summertime, guys are on offshore structure. They're on main lake humps and main lake points and stuff. In the spring, like I said, they're back in the creeks. Just those main lake banks out in the lake, sometimes the bluffs will hold them, and sometimes that's a pattern too, like in winter. But a lot of times if there's reasonable depth, if it's a 45 or a flatter like a 30-degree bank, fish will spawn out there. They live out there year-round. Maybe not as big a populations as the back of a creek, but there again, if nobody's fishing it, might be the spot to fish. And number 3 is kind of along the same lines. Fish places that look horrible, just like you'd never fish them, either with your eyes or on a map. Obviously, people are so good now at looking at a map. Anything it used to be that humps and stuff, you had to fish years to figure out where all these little swings and creek channel bends and drop-offs and stuff were. Mapping shows all that now. So if something looks good on a map to you, guess what? It looks good to me, and it looks good to him and everybody else watching the video and anybody else that ever fishes. So good looking stuff. Hey, if you got it dialed in, that works great. But the stuff that looks miserable, basically the stuff, if you look at it and say, I would never fish there, there's no reason for me to go over here on this part of the lake, that's a spot to investigate. Now, a lot of times you're going to strike out because guess what? Like we talked about, it doesn't have the right stuff. But sometimes there's a lone brush pile, or lo and behold, the map was a little wrong, or man, that looks really shallow over there. It looks really deep, but actually there's one section that's not, or it comes out really shallow, but then it drops off fast, or it's not what you think. And that's the type of stuff that, yeah, you're going to strike out a lot, but if this is your home lake or a lake that you're trying to find a winning pattern on for a tournament, sometimes fishing that stuff that looks ugly to everybody else, if you can find a group of fish there, probably going to have it yourself. So we're getting up to number 2 now. We're getting near the top, and these are a couple good ones. So number 2 is the opposite of number 3. Instead of looking for something that looks awful, you look for something that's really good, but you find something that's hiding in plain sight. Now, you can't always do this, but I'll give you a couple examples of what I mean. Right now, it's a springtime. Water's up in willow trees in the buckbrush. Everybody's going down and just pounding all that obvious wood, the laydowns, the trees and stuff, throwing jigs and spinnerbaits up in there, not throwing a crankbait, right? We already talked about that, but they're fishing that obvious stuff. Now, if you can find If this is the wood here and everybody's boat's coming right down the edge, if you can find something that holds fish that's right underneath where all the boats are going, that's basically they're driving over but not fishing it, that's something to me that's hiding in plain sight. Say for instance, if this is the wood, all the boats are going here, well underneath the boats there's a real thin strip of grass, just a little bit, not much, or just a few lily pads coming up or something like that. Nobody's going to come and fish that because they're all so concentrated on the eye candy there. Another thing, main lake points, super obvious. If you get one that looks great on a map, that looks great looking at it, everybody's going to go over there and they're going to go fish that main lake point. And if there's some like nice dock there, clump of grass or something right on the point, well, that's what everybody's fishing. Now, if you can find something that's 100 yards away, all of a sudden that isn't on that tip of that point, but there's just a tiny little spot that's not marked on the map, maybe a single clump of grass over there, or maybe a lone brush pile over there, or just a spot where it's kind of stays shallow, or it turns a little rockier for a second. You see it one year when the water's down, there's one patch of rocks right there. That's hiding in plain sight. Everybody fishes the eye candy, the obvious spot right there, and no matter how many people come and fish it, nobody fishes that other spot. It protects it. If it's just a straight, boring looking bank, people are going to kind of investigate and they're going to try to fish all options. But when there's that eye candy there that looks so good, they're so zoned in, nobody fishes that obvious spot next to it. Their boats go over it. They may be sitting on top of it when they're throwing the other stuff, but that's hidden. And you can fish that all season long and all tournament long, and people, one after another, go right by it and miss the best part of the whole spot. So number one, tell me if this has ever happened to you, either waiting in line at a tournament or talking to your buddy at the boat ramp after you've been fishing. It's a spawn and you were fishing all day and it's been a grind and your buddy asks you how it was and you're like, well, I caught some, but man, I had to throw that wacky worm out there and I had to fish on light line. I had to let it sit forever. And then all of a sudden, every once in a while, a little one would pick it up. And, oh man, it was just a grind. We caught some, but it was just tough and boats everywhere. And it was just a grind. And then you ask your buddy or the guy standing next to you in the line to weigh in, hey, how'd you do? And you're like, man, I just threw a topwater all day. We threw buzzwater and a spook and a whopper plopper, and we caught them all day. It's just like they'd never seen a lure before. They're coming up, but a couple of times I got two on the same bait, and man, they were fighting for it. Had one jump off, and then another one got it. I mean, it was. We just wrecked them all day. We just ran around. Oh, did you caught them in one spot? No. I mean, we just ran the whole lake. I mean, what did we catch, Larry? We got 50 today. Yeah, we caught 50. They're all big ones. It was just crazy. Yeah, you've had that conversation, right? The number one tip is to fish the next season. Say, for instance, it's still cold. It's the spring. It hasn't really warmed up yet. If you figure out, everybody else is winter fishing, if you figure out where the spawning fish are, the first ones, nobody else is going to be there. Those fish have just moved up. They're going to be aggressive and biting. And guess what? Every day after you find them, that pattern's getting better and better. And all those people fishing the current pattern in the winter, those fish are going away. They're doing the next thing. Same with the shad spawn. The example I gave, that happens all the time. Fish are spawning, everybody's fighting over the same ones. Everybody knows where they're at. People are bed fishing all of them. Well, people figure out the shad spawn, the ones that are chasing around minnows. Well, everybody else is throwing wacky worms and trying to get those beat up bedfish to bite. Well, they're chasing shad all over and topwaters and buzz baits, all that fun stuff. I mean, they're just crushing them all day. Fish the next season. The first time, I won Kentucky Lake doing this. Everybody was in post spawn doing shad spawn. I found the first fish out there deep. Guess what? There weren't lots of them, but every day I graphed them, a couple more would show up, and those fish were hungry and eating. The fish in the next part on the calendar, I mean, that's the way to do it. Anytime you're in a tournament, that's how you win, just because those fish are starting to load up. People aren't on that pattern, they're not beat up, and there's more coming to you every day. So that's my top 10. You can't always get away from the crowd. You can't always do something different, but using these Moneyball techniques helps you put the odds in your favor, helps you catch a few more fish, at least sometimes.